So it's really, really great to have as many as you here today. I'm Rose. This webinar is part of kind of a wider series hosted by Pulsar-Audiense, and we've had some really, really wonderful sessions, and this will not be any different. So on behalf of myself, I'm a product specialist here at Audience, and my co-host Abby Day, who is just on there, just give her a wave. A very, very, very warm welcome from us. So we're also lucky, as you can probably see, to be joined by Olivia and Michael, who are senior consultants and digital specialists at Kekst CNC, which is the leading global communications firm. So they're going to talk to us today about 3 case studies that they've done. And I've seen the slides already, and we are all in for a real treat. So the 3 case studies that they're going to discuss today are sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and health as well. And actually how within these 3 case studies, they've been using Pulsar and Pulsar-Audiense communities integration. So I'm not going to give too much away about the case studies, but before I do, and before I hand over the mic to my co-host and then to our guests, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the communities integrations for anyone who might not be familiar. So communities really is a combination of the kind of best of Pulsar and Audience. So Pulsar is a sophisticated social listening tool which helps organizations understand their audiences and create messages that matter to them. And Pulsar allows us to actually analyze conversation in immense detail. And as someone that uses Pulsar on the day-to-day, I can definitely testify to that. And Audience, that's where I'm from. We are an audience intelligence platform that uses social data to carry out consumer segmentation based on interconnectivity. So kind of what in practice that means is what we do is we segment audiences through who knows whom. And then what we do is we provide deep insights into those segments, things like demographics, influences, what networks are these people on, where can you find them, and different personality traits as well. So as I said, communities really combines the best of these 2 tools and really adds a new level of understanding to both your audience insights work and your conversational analysis. And how does it work, as you can see in this slide here? So what we do is we track topics in Pulsar, then Audience segments this audience, and then they do that through that interconnectivity. And then the communities feature, what it allows us to do is it brings those segments back to that conversation to actually understand how these different segments are relating to that particular conversation. It really helps us to answer those key questions of, who are the people behind these conversations? Why are they engaging with that particular topic? And it can demonstrate to us that depending on who these people are, that they can come to participate in a conversation, but in a very, very different way. And I think Davide is going to show that as we go through these slides here. So as you can see here, communities can give us a better understanding. It can help us make informed decisions about what to do next. And the communities features you'll see in this presentation today can be actioned in a variety of different ways. And just a few of the cases that we have here. So it can, and these are just a couple of many, audience insights, so understanding your audience and understanding your segments, influences and media strategy, so really beginning to understand actually not the influences of the audience, but also the influences in the conversation as well. So that kind of combination of both. Campaign planning, so being able to actually find the right criteria that you can use to start targeting for paid advertisements across lots of different platforms. Campaign measurement as well, which I think is particularly interesting because actually you can start to measure the change of your audience or the differences in your different segments as you go through different campaigns and actually you move through maybe different the different parts of the year. And then SEO as well, we've got here. And actually, if you haven't checked out our last webinar in the series, we did one which was in partnership with Symmetrical, and it really focuses in on this SEO use case and is completely, definitely, absolutely worth a watch if you're interested in that. But that's enough of me, and I'm going to hand it over to my co-host now, and he's going to continue with a couple of communities case studies. So it's over to you, Davide.
Thank you so much, Rose. So yeah, my name is Davide Beretta, marketing team at Pulsar. So before I leave the virtual floor to the real stars of the show, which is Livia and Michael, I'm just going to take a few minutes to show you in practice some of the ways in which we have been using communities. Is really such a powerful and versatile tool that it's really exciting to use and apply to different conversation and topics and see how the two interact. So the first one that I'm going to show you real quick is the gaming audience analysis that we ran. This is something that we looked at the beginning of the first lockdown. As you can see, we were a little bit optimistic about the timings of post-lockdown, which right now we put it July 23rd. That didn't go that way. But what we saw is that the conversation, which you see at the top, was growing about gaming, right? People were locked in, they were trying new games, people were coming back to games. But what's interesting, besides the conversation growing, is that the audience was really changing. The makeup of the audience was changing throughout the different stages. So you see, for instance, here in the mid-lockdown, like you have this big chunk of people who are like, people who are interested in first-person shooters who just come out of nowhere and tend to dominate the conversation throughout the lockdown and stay like further on. A second one that I wanted to show you was a piece that we did in collaboration with the Next Web, and this was looking at the cultural influence of Netflix. And so it was looking at how topics that were covered in the Netflix shows kind of became much more mainstream after the show dropped. And so we looked at neurodiversity with Love on the Spectrum, which is a show about dating on the spectrum. And this, The Queen's Gambit, one of everybody's favorite shows for 2020. Of course, like it started to get people talking about chess. Here we see search interest and social interest and how they're growing, like after the show drops. But really, who are the people who are participating in this conversation? This is what communities can allow us to see. This is the before and after the show drop. We see the conversation, some of it like stays pretty stable, the people who are participating in it. But then you see, again, a whole segment which didn't exist before, left-wing pop culture here, which becomes like super important. And you're able to see who these people are, what kind of affinities they might have, in this case, like gaming culture, celebrities. And you see the hardcore chess acolytes here up at the top right. They become a much smaller part of the conversation, but also a little bit more segregated, right? Might there be a little bit of snobbiness there about playing chess? You'd have to see this data to find out. This is another little case study about Giving Tuesday. As you know, in the United States, that is the charity industry's answer to Black Friday. Very, very important moment for charities. We just looked here. We did something a little bit different. We looked at what kind of charities were being talked about in association with Giving Tuesday. So we had the animal charities, we had the environmental charities, of course we had the children's charities. And here, that's one segment of this conversation that was related to the children's charities. And here you start to see like different segments and see like how these people are talking about the same topic very differently. In this case, like sports fans, for instance, very interesting segment emerging here in blue right at the center, which gives you like an insight that is actionable, really, like if you're in this space. Sports fans really care about children's charities. Last one that I'm going to share is about the non-dairy alt milks. Some people say, shouldn't even be calling them milks, but there's really no doubt that this is a trend that is here to stay. Alternative milks. Here we look at the top brands. Again, like in Pulsar, we see like what brands are being mentioned the most. We have Oatly, we have Silk, we have So Delicious, but then we also see like what types of milk people are interested in. I'm an oat man myself, but as you can see, like represent. But then we have almond, which is really dominating this conversation. But then, what communities allows us to do is to zoom in into those segments, topical segments, and see like what audience is representing those. So for instance, this is a snapshot of the whole full category report that we did on the oat audiences. And here we start to see like some very interesting communities in here, like gamers, in this case, largely female community, affinity for YouTube, very interested in Dunkin' Donuts, adding oat milk as an option. And they were celebrating and rejoicing that moment, or Black Lives Matter supporters, again, people who are maybe not as interested in dairy or almond milk, but very present on TikTok. Again, many actionable insights about your audience and how they're talking about the same topic, in this case, alt milks broadly, more in detail. So that's going to be it for us. I'm going to drop the links for any of these in the chat if you guys want to take a better look at these. But really, I want to leave the virtual floor as much as possible to Livia and Michael, who are going to take us through an amazing presentation, which I'm really looking forward to seeing. Michael, Livia, I'm going to stop sharing right now and let you take it away.
Great, thank you very much. Wait one moment whilst I share the presentation and the world realize digital specialists can't work out Zoom. One moment. Now, hopefully that went really smoothly and you can all see that. But thank you so much, both for having us here today. Thank you, Pulsar-Audiense. And we're really excited about some of the case studies we're going to show you today about the power of communities to help develop purpose narratives. But before we go into the case studies, a little bit of an intro about yourselves. Really hope the session today provides you with some really interesting new ideas, perhaps inspire some fresh ideas. We realize many of you are probably sort of semi-isolated at home, if not fully isolated. So it's a tough time at the moment. My name is Michael White, and I'm a senior consultant at Kekst CNC. Do a lot of work with highly regulated industries, mostly across financial services and healthcare. And a big part of my work, particularly over the last 2 years, has been helping brands tell their purpose narrative stories. With that, I'm going to hand over to Livia.
I'm Livia. I'm a senior consultant at Kekst CNC. Throughout my career, I worked across a wide selection of clients and sectors, from corporate and commercial to public and third sector. At Kekst CNC specifically, I focus on insights-led social media marketing strategy development and implementation, including employer branding, online crisis management, social media strategy development, and activation. So now that you know a little bit more about ourselves, it might be helpful to learn more about Kekst CNC as well, and I will keep it brief. Kekst CNC is a global strategic communications firm working with businesses and institutional leaders from around the world. We work across a wide range of clients and mandates, including M&A, shareholder activism and governance, crisis communication, reputation, change management, all underpinned by digital and social communications. Kekst CNC is also part of the Publicis Group. We focus on 3 main areas: helping our clients grow, transform, and protect their reputation. Our approach is informed by insights and is based on access to proprietary research, data, and analytics capabilities. We have a team of global digital research and content specialists. They're all equipped with tools and skills to deliver data-driven approach to content. We also have access to a full creative offering, which ensures that the insights are implemented throughout the content creation process. I will now hand over to Michael to get the session started.
Thank you. So today we'll be covering 3 case studies of ours. We've anonymized them, but we've kept all the interesting bits in there. And as you know, that's on diversity, health, and sustainability. This should be quite interesting because what you'll see is how we've used this Pulsar-Audiense integration in real life on paid client projects. So we've got tracking the public topic of conversations, breaking it down into communities. You can see the bullets there. And but before we go into the case studies, we just really wanted to quickly focus on what we really mean by purpose-led narratives, because we're aware that we probably all come from different organizations, perhaps different agencies. And really for us, we believe that purpose-led organizations are winning. And by that, we mean, focusing on companies that are focusing on more than just financial gain in everything they do. Instead, we're looking at companies that are focused on their contribution to society and everything that comes with that, be that the environment, focusing on inclusivity. There's a number of different values. If you come from more of the PRE world, like we obviously do, then there's a very well-known thinker in this field called Sinek, which many of you have probably heard of, but he simplified this purpose sort of angle further by saying that most companies talk about what they do, for example, delivery of products and services, but they don't necessarily talk about why they are doing something. So we really believe focusing on why is about looking at what your convictions are as an organization. You know, what is that one thing you're willing to stand up for? And 2021 in particular has further accelerated that need for brands to develop purpose-driven narratives for their comms strategies. And that really is, you know, what is that agenda for change with a problem that can be solved? So at the moment, for example, we've seen many organizations make net zero commitments for 2050. But to show that a bit further, you know, we have picked out some examples of what's going on in the industry at the moment. And you can see here, one of the things we wanted to pick out for you was the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative. So rather than a single organization, this is a group of asset managers that have come together. So it's 30 asset managers, which accounts for about $9 trillion in assets under management. And it's a real public declaration and commitment that each asset manager will be supporting the goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 or sooner. So this is really important because a lot of these asset managers, probably all of them, have some form of variation of responsibility to ESG principles, to the environment, which that includes. So that's a good example of where sort of purpose and action come together. We picked out Burberry as well. It's a more specific example, a brand itself. Maybe there's someone from Burberry watching this today, who knows, you could tell us more at the end. But, you know, we think they really stand out, particularly in the fashion space, due to the strong actions they've taken. Part of their narrative is they say creativity opens up spaces, and they apply this to being forward thinking, to caring, being creatively driven. And some of the concrete actions they've taken is launching a sustainability bond, investing in new technology in China. And then Microsoft is actually a company I'm proud to have worked for in the past, and their purpose is quite simply to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And they have a very strong record in diversity and inclusion, CSR, and in innovation, obviously. So I think this is a good example of where purpose and action can come together. And there's obviously lots of organizations who are, you know, are other great examples. Yeah, using the power of communities here, it's really about understanding what external audiences are saying around certain subjects in order to help a brand sort of interact with those audiences. And you'll see that with our examples shortly. And we believe insights are really important for those brand narratives. So I'm just going to hand over to Olivia, who's going to talk a little bit about that.
So this actually brings me nicely to a few points on how insights can help inform brand narratives. So through the work we do, we've seen that successful brand storytelling is created in partnership with audiences. When I first joined the industry, marketing and comms were focused more on customer segmentation. The evolution of tools like Pulsar-Audiense allows us now to look beyond that and get a better understanding of the values and topics that matter to our target audience. In other words, we now have access to an array of tools to help us understand our audiences better and even uncover new opportunities in terms of targeting, for example. The granularity of data we can access now also allows us to drive differentiation by segmenting people in a category by channel or by topic of conversation, for example. We can identify insights much easier as we get rid of a lot of noise. When segments really come into their own is when you can track behaviors over time. This can show how the public opinion has changed on a specific topic, and you can also see who is still leading the conversation. And if we move to the next slide, we can see that now we have access to a whole suite of internal and external data sources that can be used to inform brand narratives. The insights can help us uncover what our audiences talk about, what words they use, what matters most to them, how their opinion has changed over time, what proof points we need as marketers to convince them or to talk more closely with them, what our competitors are doing, and what other opportunities we could leverage.
And analyzing social data is still really important. We're lucky to have a long relationship with Pulsar and Audience. I think I've personally been using Pulsar for just over 6 years now. And, using social media data is really key behind that. As Olivia just showed, there's obviously a lot more than social data we look at, and there's other tools we also use. So I think this presentation shows you some of the stuff we can achieve with Pulsar and Audience and that integration. But social is definitely a very valuable data source for understanding more about audiences. And as you probably all know, there's probably digital specialists watching this right now. The amount of data that Twitter allows access to and how that tool is used for building communities just makes it a very valuable source for understanding how topics are being shared. And that's something we can analyze. And actually, whilst we're focusing on the insights in this presentation to show how brand narratives can sort of be designed, if you wanted to say that, actually tracking the audience is useful afterwards as well, because you can kind of understand, do people really care about the content we're creating and the stories we're saying, So with all of that, we're finally coming on to the case studies, but we just wanted to give you a bit of a background on how we approach things at Kekst CNC. And the first one we're looking at is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this was really looking at conversations around the luxury fashion space to ascertain viewpoints around diversity topics for a well-known brand. And it's worth saying here, the intensity of focus on Black Lives Matter has, and I'm going to say the word corporately, if that is a word, driven a lot of positive change. They're quite simply, people are becoming a lot braver to discuss diversity. I think it was a question people were a bit worried out for. Perhaps I'm saying that as a Brit, because we're always worried about offending and things. But I think Black Lives Matter, the movement itself, got people asking, what is diversity? Are we diverse as a business? What does that even mean? How are we measuring this? What are we trying to achieve and why? And importantly, how do people feel, particularly employees? And I think even more so in the fashion space, I think it's no secret that diversity has been quite a difficult topic. You do some quick Google searches and you'll see sometimes designs become available on the market that are perceived as racist. Internally, for a lot of brands, diversity just has not been the gender item. And so, our work here was looking at a fashion brand at the very early steps of diversity, mostly to understand external perceptions first. So we've got a similar structure with all the case studies we'll go through here. Very happy to take questions at the end if we miss anything. So a summary of the work here. So we took a year's worth of Twitter data in mentions on 6 luxury fashion brands alongside diversity keywords. So that was our sort of Boolean string that we sort of put together. And what that allowed us to do to identify sort of prominent topics, including political intervention and some of the activities of the brands themselves. And obviously the audience segmentation side, which is really important because this is quite a difficult topic to run a social search on. And just because we want to look really smart, we put a screenshot of a snippet of the raw data in there because sometimes I think it's good to remind ourselves about what sort of data is being used to fuel these research pieces. I'm always blown away by Pulsar's and Audience's capability to take this sort of data and provide visuals on it. And they're not paying me to say that, but they can if they want. And we can we can see here that using Twitter is great for this type of research because Twitter's full of community discussions. It's full of people with different points of views, which can obviously have a downside as well. It can make some aspects of Twitter toxic, but it can also be very good a good way to build up a community. So this is just a very small snippet of the 32,000 Twitter posts we gathered over that sort of 1 year period. And so what we did is put this into a timeline. So if you organize this data into a timeline a pattern started to emerge around luxury fashion brands and the diversity topics. And it's really sad because, it may not surprise any of you, but that does begin with the murder of George Floyd. Black Lives Matter has been a movement that's been running for a lot longer than that, but it was this instance, this murder that took place that really put the spotlight on Black Lives Matter, which we would have all seen in the media as well, and brands trying to work out what does that mean. So we can see here that instance took place. And then after that, social mentions begin to climb. Protesters target luxury fashion stores. That's still a really complicated issue, that one. There's a lot of peaceful protests going on, arguably perhaps more meaningful. But there was sort of opportunists in that who did break into the stores. But either way, the outcome, all of that was the stores were being broken into, brands were being mentioned alongside Black Lives Matter, and the diversity track records of brands were starting to come to light again. So I just also wanted to quickly say here, the number of posts on this section is far less compared to the overall Black Lives Matter discussion that was taking place, because obviously we had the labels being searched for at the same time. So what happened was, the protest took place, and then we started to see some brands speaking out. And that's not necessarily always a good thing. Some brands were quite quick to speak out, and I think even then hadn't done quite a temperature check on what the audience was thinking, or perhaps they didn't have very good track records, and people realised that, but they were trying to make a stand for something. So it was quite a tense period. There were other brands during this period that you probably know the names of, who didn't say anything. At least in the beginning of the Black Lives Matter discussion, which, again, could be seen as a negative thing, but actually in our experience in advising clients, I think there were lots of businesses over this period who just wanted to listen to the conversation and try to understand it before saying something. And that's something personally I can sort of relate to as well. It was a complicated subject. And, the output of all of that, really, or outcome, is Black Lives Matter is still very high on the agenda. We're seeing a sustained level of 400% higher than before the 28th of May. That's ongoing today. It's the movement is being discussed frequently, in particular with the fashion labels. So out of all of this, we wanted to understand more what was going on with the community side. So if you imagine all of that data is loaded into Pulsar, we went to the audience tab, and we sent it on its way to Audience. And in Audience, we worked on the data. So Audience obviously does a great job of finding communities algorithmically, but it always needs a human eye to go over it and just make sure the labels are right, make sure the categorizations are okay. And that's a very good thing, because it means we all keep a job and computers don't take over. What we found here was a big Black Lives Matter part of the debate. Yes, this isn't that granular, but perhaps we could say that's the more meaningful side of the debate. That was people actually discussing diversity issues alongside sort of all the political tension that was taking place as well. And we've also got politics being mentioned naturally. Obviously, it's a very political subject, particularly in the instance we were tracking. But alongside sort of general politics conversation, there was actually a lot of Trump supporters, Donald Trump supporters, involved as well. And that's when we started understanding a little bit more about some potential manipulation that was taking place in the conversation. We were seeing in those Trump supporters, a lot of the accounts were quite new. A lot of them didn't have profile pictures. There are a lot of sort of algorithmic names going on there. And so actually breaking down this discussion into these communities allowed us to really hone in on, I suppose, the real parts of the debate and the parts of the debate that are sort of being manipulated and certain subjects are being raised. So it was a really helpful sort of exercise to go through. And then with all the research we do, we try to focus in on sort of what are the insights we're trying to take out of all of this. So what we found here is obviously Black Lives Matter is a long-term movement, and change needs to come from within. So, you know, and all of this with developing this narrative, you know, obviously we're looking externally at what people are thinking here, but actually the most important question for a brand in this situation is, you know, what have you done and what are you planning to do to support diversity and inclusion? And, you know, with a lot of the fashion brands that were coming out, it was clear that that thinking was in the very early stages, perhaps, and it hadn't been kind of decided. So looking internally is one of the most important things to do first. We saw the effort was being led by a lot of independent brands and individuals. Forget the big brands, these are the small ones, and a lot of the smaller brands, you know, have cultural focuses already. But between that, there was a real gap for meaningful action and leadership from the major brands. And the other thing as well is, you know, you can have a very well-known brand, but the values may not be so well known. So it's really key to make sure that the values are just as well known as your brand is, essentially. And understanding what this audience was saying was a real key part of that. So this is the case study on diversity and inclusion. What I'm going to do now is jump quickly to our health one. And before I hand over to Livia, and at the end we'll take any questions you may have. We're trying to cover a lot in today's presentation. So health. Now, naturally, health is on the agenda for very obvious reasons. But the real focus here with healthcare was to understand more about an audience of healthcare professionals. So again, this case study shows what's possible by gathering Twitter data. And it's worth saying as well, we were sort of skeptical at the beginning because we didn't really know how many people would share medical professional status on Twitter. We just weren't very familiar with that, particularly if you look at specific groups of people like surgeons. And in this example as well, the brand we're working with already had a very strong idea of what their purpose could be. So really here it was about understanding what the audience was saying and what they were thinking, and if that matched up, and what sort of stories should be coming from the brand in terms of the actions they're doing. So what we've done is we conducted social media research into well-known brands in the pharma industry to understand who the engaged audiences were. And that allowed us to identify an online community of surgeons and broader healthcare professionals engaged in conversations. And then we analyzed those topics of discussions along with their behaviors. And I'm going to jump in this example straight to the audiences. So if you imagine we ran that Pulsar search on all that data. And what that showed us is, if you look at some of the major brands, you know, these are the 4 of the key audiences that are coming out. So this was gathered by using thousands of mentions, and these are the communities that sort of dominated those discussions. I think one of the first things that surprised us was, as you can see, this is a bit of a younger audience that was appearing. I think people were using, or healthcare professionals were using social as a bit of a training opportunity. You see that with other social networks like Sermo, which you might be familiar with. But if you dig a little bit deeper into the demographics, you know, there is an older age group that appears as well at about an equal sort of balance to the 18 and 24 you can see there. So I think something to keep in mind in this example is, you know, Twitter is obviously very reliant on the data that people provide it with, but actually by digging into these groups a bit more and seeing the sort of content that was being shared, it was really possible to understand what the audiences were using social for. And you know, one of my favorite parts of audience, and I'd love to use it more, is Ibm Watson Integration. So you may all be familiar with Ibm Watson. I think they call themselves augmented intelligence, narrowly avoiding AI. And what it can do is it can look at all of the social media posts that are coming through a search and start to try to understand what are the potential personality insights that are coming through here. So this is way more than sentiment and emotion. You know, it's right down into what are these audiences potentially thinking? What are they like? I must admit we don't use it all that often, just because you You know, it's quite far-fetched. Perhaps it's a glimpse of the future today. But actually, it was super helpful with this piece of research we did on healthcare, because what it allowed us to do is look at each individual audience group and start understanding what is the content they like. You know, we could see with medical technology, for example, and all the discussions that took place around that group, that independence in achieving success was a large part of what they do. Engaging communities was a really important part as well, demonstrating the capabilities that are possible. So for the brand we're working with, that was really helpful, because if we've got any innovation stories, there'd be a real relevance to that group, and we know how to position those stories based on how the medical technology group are sharing. I think one of the most fascinating groups was surgeons, who have a very specific way of doing things. They're very hands-on people, unsurprisingly. That's probably a good quality to have in a surgeon. You know, and they like really understanding, for example, products they might be using and things. So we're able to go down to this level to really understand, you know, how to better engage with them and how to frame our content. But importantly, and using the full communities integration, once these audiences were generated, we're able to then put that data back into Pulsar and categorize it that way. So what we did was, for example, with surgeons, is we go back in Pulsar, open up the communities tab, as you can see there, and click on surgeons. And if by magic the search updates, and we can see what surgeons have been posting, and a lot of surgeons as well actually label themselves as surgeons or medical professionals in their bios. And what we found really surprised us, because they were using Twitter in a way we hadn't expected, because they were anonymizing patient information and then sharing screenshots of like MRI scans and things, and going, "Hi everyone, you know, there's a nail inside this person that's sheared in half. What should I do about this? Have you had a similar situation?" Maybe one of you listening to this, that was, you know, that was a problem you're experiencing. But it's quite fascinating, and it really showed us quite a lot into how surgeons use Twitter in particular. And again, I just wanted to end on some key insights that were useful for this exercise in helping shape that narrative. But what we could really see here is a lot of the competitors that we're looking at and peers we're looking at in this space had really built up niche audiences already. And actually, there's a big opportunity to engage with that healthcare community directly. I think a lot of people, it's such a basic point, but a lot of people forget that with social, particularly Twitter. You know, it's social media, and it is possible to engage with a community. The structure of content really matters as well. So, you know, IBM Watson was a really helpful part of that, to understand personality types of certain audiences, obviously audience groups. And that was helpful in shaping stories for them. I think more specifically in this situation, we saw that in terms of healthcare, there were lots of very, I don't know, logical stories would be the word, a lot of numbers-based, science-based stories, but actually being emotional in a logical space could be a really powerful way to stand out. So we've said here that, you know, emotion can carry a lot more influence compared to intellectual observations, appeal to people's hearts first. So you can imagine what that could potentially have meant from a campaign perspective, and what that could have meant from their narrative perspective as well. It's one thing to talk about specific products with surgeons, but from a wider perspective, emotions really matter. So with that, I'm going to hand over to the third very hot topic for 2021, which is sustainability. So over to you, Livia.
Sustainability, but more specifically ESG. So obviously, I think we all know that ESG in the past year has been one of the hot topics. So Twitter reported recently that they've seen a 360% increase in tweets around this topic. So around corporate responsibility and sustainability alone. So for this case study, this is a little bit different from what Michael presented. So if in the previous case studies would look at the Twitter data, this case study focuses on and analyzes the followers of an influencer and what they are interested in discussing and talking about. So for this specific one, our clients were interested to find out more about ESG and what ESG influencers and their followers are discussing online. More specifically, what is their tone of voice and what are the topics that matter most to them. On this few slides, we focus specifically on one thought leader that is one of the biggest thought leaders in ESG. So if you want to go to the next slide. So using Pulsar-Audiense, we can see the broad sphere of influence of this author. So he is followed by UN entities, journalists, NGOs, scientists, and entrepreneurs, all interested in what he has to say about ESG. Interestingly, we can see that these audiences interact, as in they like, comment, and share different types of posts from the same influencer. For example, the UN entities endorse posts where the influencer calls for corporate and governments to use the pandemic as a catalyst for change. So a very immediate tone of voice. Social welfare NGOs, on the other hand, are engaging more with posts that flag the effects of the pandemic on women. And for example, women returning back to the previous jobs that they had before. And entrepreneurs are more interested in posts focused on diversity, inclusion, and the power of female leadership. So we can see the difference between what each of their target audiences are interested in. This analysis has helped us discover some interesting insights. If you want to go to the next slide, Michael. So corporate climate action is a top area of interest, so it's closely monitored, and corporations and governments are being called on to do more and offer the proof points behind their initiatives and results. A convincing diversity and inclusion positioning is a must. However, creating a better and more inclusive workforce is a highly discussed topic, but it needs to be supported by proof points and by actual initiatives. And finally, which was actually one of the interesting ones for us as well, was that leadership qualities of those in charge are being closely monitored. So strong leadership is expected from corporations and governments alike, and influencers have been praised. So influencers have been praising the leaders who are taking action, but have reprehended the ones who have stayed silent. We just published today actually the full results of this research on our website, and we can circulate the link alongside this presentation if you want to read more about it and find out a little bit more about the other insights that we have uncovered. So with this, we've ended our case study section of the presentation, and we can answer any questions you might have.
Great.
Thank you so much, Livia and Michael. That was really, really great. I would encourage everybody, we've had several questions already come through. I would encourage everybody who has questions about any of these case studies, any of the methodology behind it, to drop them in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen. One question that is obvious in looking at these highly specialized sectors and emerging sectors in some cases, such as ESG and diversity, equity, and inclusion. What is the most challenging part of dealing with this data and kind of extracting meaning and potential narratives from these conversations?
I can start off. I think, the examples we've provided today, obviously, to build a brand narrative, a purpose narrative, is quite a big task, and it starts by looking internally within your organization. So I think the examples we provided today provide a way to see how external audiences are behaving, which can help inform. And I think such as like with diversity, equity, and inclusion, DE&I, it can be really helpful just to understand what's the temperature of the audience, what are the discussions that are taking place, what's happening to our peers. Have they made any mistakes? Are they doing things well? So all of that's really helpful for informing stories, and not even just stories, because I think the worst thing with a purpose narrative is where there's no action to back it up, because then it just sort of becomes hot air and maybe something quite sinister. So we always make sure there's strong actions there. And I think with the data point, I don't know, myself and Livia might both have bugbears when it comes to setting up these searches. I know mine is just setting the search up and knowing what the search will be, because it takes quite a lot of trial and error, I would say, just depending on the topics and the keywords you're looking at. If you're looking at a company, sometimes companies have got really easy distinct names, and it makes it easier to find stuff about them. Other times it might be a lot broader, and so you have to start excluding things. So I think that's probably the most time-consuming part of setting a search up, but it's worthwhile because obviously then you've got all the data collected and you can work on it and you can change it over time. I don't know if that helps answer the question or if Livia's got anything to add.
Yeah, I think like within all searches, there is an element of trying to get rid of the noise and actually finding the insights. And I think, well, I've done numerous trainings on how to find insights. And I think obviously this is where you would need a little bit of experience, and you would need the more research you do, the easiest would be to identify what is the important information that you should tell a client or put on the slides. Obviously, it helps if you know a lot about the industry and about the client, so you know already what to be looking for. But I would say that the experience of doing a lot of research and actually having a little bit of a passion about it as well, just because obviously the more time you spend on something, the better you would become at it. And it's the same with insights, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Livia. And the expertise really comes in handy when knowing what to look for, right? And this is going to be a little bit of a self-serving comment, but that's kind of what we're trying to build up in the platform more and more. The kind of AI models that are going to do a little bit of the heavy lifting for you. I'm not sure whether you used our ESG conversational model for this analysis here, or whether you used Sermo data for the healthcare conversation. But I think the whole industry as a whole is kind of trying to simplify that process of understanding these large data sets and kind of spotting patterns within them. And for us, the answer there is definitely more and smarter AI models, which I'm sure that you also have been using. We have another question that is about hashtags. If you don't use hashtags, how do you keep track of discussion? That depends, of course, on the conversation that you're looking at. Certain platforms are better suited to hashtags, for instance, Instagram. Others, it's just spotting keywords, and we pick up those keywords from all the platforms that we look at. But yes, I think that I'm not sure if you have anything to add, Michael, Olivia, on the difficulty of spotting. Hashtags are very useful, right? Because they aggregate conversations for you, and they can tell you what this is related to. What are some of your tips and tricks for handling that, Michael and Olivia?
So keywords, definitely. But also I feel like if you just look at hashtags, you might miss some other topics of conversations that it might actually be more interesting to you, or you might miss something out if you just look at specific hashtags, because some people would use it, some people will not use that hashtag, and probably there are others that you could be following as well. So maybe keywords, I think in this situation might give you better results and a broader view on a topic. And also looking at the main influencers and identifying a list of influencers and seeing what they are talking about, and also how they shape the conversation, how the conversation evolves over time.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think a lot of the topics we're looking across as well, they don't tend to be necessarily big consumer topics that have big hashtags associated with them. And even if you're tracking a hashtag, we find it can still be quite noisy on a single hashtag. So you still need to filter it with keywords. But obviously that's not the same for each social network. I think on Instagram, it's just hashtags, which is useful, can come with its own challenges. I think the same with TikTok as well. So it's try to filter the data best you can per social network, I think, and all social networks work in very different ways.
But also on that, I think because users don't use hashtags in the same way, so not everyone uses hashtags in the same way, so that makes the research around it a little bit more difficult. Just because we know we've all seen Instagram and even LinkedIn posts where at the end you have a series of 5 hashtags, only the first one has something to do with the actual topic, the rest of them are more self-promotional, which doesn't quite help when you try to do research and you try to find the insight on a specific topic. Yeah,
different people use hashtags differently. I personally only use them ironically, so that creates a big headache.
You ruin the entire search if you use them.
The whole data set, yes. One last question is about whether you saw any overlaps between these conversations that you tracked and the different audiences that were participating in them. I think you might have hinted at some of those with the diversity, inclusion, and sustainability. Were you even looking at the same time span, I guess, like in order to spot similarities?
These are all totally separate kind of case studies that all ran at different times. So there was no overlap between those particular data sets. You do get overlaps, particularly with sort of the political elements that comes through with the Twitter conversations. We always tend to see overlaps there. I still think it's really useful to have the segmentation filter come through, because as soon as you segment an audience, you do see there is specific content being shared. There are specific audience affinities that come through in terms of potential influential individuals and organizations sort of closely tied with those groups. So yeah, but there's always slight overlap. I think the biggest overlap that we tend to see is in sort of people's sort of comms channel behaviors and things. I love the fact that when you've segmented an audience, it's possible based on the links they're sharing and what's in their profiles and things, are able to understand what are the newspapers and magazines they're going to, what are the radio stations they might listen to, just general websites they visit. I think all those different behaviors are really helpful. So that's a good example of when you can use social data sort of to inform a bigger, more integrated comms program.
Yep.
But maybe the another insight, I think, from all the case studies together is that diversity and inclusion and sustainability and ESG conversations are throughout all other topics. So they expand and they actually cover other interesting topics that might matter to clients. So I think that's also interesting to remember, the fact that ESG is now something that's important, but also ESG is such a broad topic, and it has obviously the E, the S, and the G, so it's a lot to contain in one conversation, and sustainability is just one. And diversity and inclusion, you could say that it is part of ESG, so it is part of the S, the social part of ESG. So it's just the conversations are so broad and they expand and they actually affect so many other conversations. I think it's quite interesting to see how you can analyze and how actually the audience that talks about these topics change over time, depending on what else you look at. So for example, in my case study, we looked at people who are following an ESG influencer, but Michael looked at fashion, and we actually, in a way, it is the same audience, but in other ways, it also has other attributes that we should be mindful of.
Context is everything, right? And some of these topics like keep growing and evolving and morphing and yeah, bridging with other topics as you suggested.
Yeah, I think you can write books on the audiences on Twitter and how they discuss and how they go from one topic to the next in the span of 1 hour, and they cover everything from ESG to diversity and inclusion to what their latest order was on ASOS. So I think it's just it's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I know you have a busy rest of the afternoon, so I think if there aren't any more other questions that come in, I think we will pause it here. I wanted to say thank you so much to Livia and Michael for joining us and sharing all this wisdom and those case studies. Yeah, we will be sending, keep an eye on your inbox. We will be sending a follow-up email with details about this presentation, as well as a recording. Yes, Rose, any final words for this run through?
No, I mean, that was brilliant. I enjoyed every minute. So thank you very, very much.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you all for listening. And if you've got any questions, very happy to answer them outside of the webinar too. You saw our email addresses flash up earlier, and we're all over Twitter.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody for joining, and keep your eyes peeled for the next invitation of the next communities webinar, which will come in the next few weeks. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Great. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.